that.
Senator Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Senators, I speak today on behalf of our colleague, Senator Dan Christmas, who, though he remains in mourning over the recent tragic loss of his wife, feels compelled to share a story of political courage with you all. Just recently in Nova Scotia, we've seen Premier Stephen McNeil undertake an act of political courage by closing the Northern Pulp Mill to honour an agreement with the Pictou Landing First Nation. That act of political courage was to Senator Christmas outstanding, and it reminded him of an event 30 years ago to this very day, February 20th, when he personally witnessed another act of amazing political courage, something so significant that is seared into his memory, never to be forgotten. The 1980s were a period of great difficulty for Nova Scotia and the Mi'kmaq. There were confrontations, arrests, and court cases, and much anger in the media. There was virtually no dialogue and no relationship between the provincial leadership and the Mi'kmaq. Add to this dynamic that the big news story of that day was all about Donald Marshall Jr., released from prison in 1982, wrongfully jailed in a federal prison for 11 years for a murder he did not commit. But the extent of his tragedy didn't end there. When his case was reviewed by the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, Jr. was blamed again for his own misfortune. The public outcry was huge. The provincial government finally had to call a public inquiry into why Jr. was wrongfully convicted. The inquiry began in 1988 in Sydney, where the murder had taken place. Over a period of a year and a half, the inquiry unveiled the ugly story of the relationship, or lack thereof, between Nova Scotia and the Mi'kmaq. The inquiry report was finally released in January 1990 and laid the blame squarely on the entire justice system, Nova Scotia justice system, and it emphatically concluded that Junior Marshall was a victim of racism. At the height of this tension, the government of Nova Scotia did the unthinkable, or at least the wildly unexpected. It apologized. This could have been done by issuing a news release or by staging a press conference. Instead, the Attorney General of Nova Scotia at that time personally came to Sydney and to Membertou to meet with Donald Marshall Jr.'s family face-to-face and to apologize. Senator Christmas was in the room that day and will never forget the impact of witnessing such an extraordinary display of political courage by the then Nova Scotia Attorney General, a man who was none other than our esteemed colleague and Senator Christmas's friend, Senator Tom McGuinness. 30 years on, Senator Christmas considers Tom McGuinness's actions that day as one of the most unforgettable demonstrations of political courage he has ever witnessed. And he thanks his honourable colleague for his humility and graciousness. Thank you.